And this part of the property was special to Mary Henry in its own way, right?
Well, yes, because actually, you make a really important point, because this is where she put her cabin. And this was like a writing lab for her. This is where she documented her collection from a scientific and also a story point of view. Actually, when you read her story, she says that her writings are actually a story of her garden. So that's, as I'm typing up her diary notes, we now know what she wants to call her book. And that's great, because it's the story of the garden. It's not just a plant catalog where it's not just the data. We have an abundance of data here. All kinds of records, from herbarium records to the collecting journals and the correspondence and the photographs. It just goes on and on. But only in her book does she write down the stories of each plant, and each plant does pretty much have a story of where it came from, the circumstances of finding it, the circumstances of the people involved with finding it, because of course there was no roadmap that said, Halesia monticola is right here. She might have heard about the stories about it, but no, she had to ask people. So along the way, in fact, this Halesia, this is a pink-flowered monticola, and she was driving along in North Carolina, I believe it was, and she stopped and she saw this beautiful tree. It was pink, and she stopped, and the owner said that, she could have the whole tree if she wanted it. But it was a 25-foot tree, and so my grandmother said, well, thank you very much, but could I buy some seeds from you? Could you send me some seeds when the seeds ripen? And so eventually, when the seeds were produced later that year, she sent the seeds, and Mary Henry hatched out a bunch of seedlings and selected two that were particularly pink. And this was the pinkest one of the batch is this one. So it's quite a nice pink. Arnold Arboretum, one of her friends at the Arnold Arboretum, said that it was more pink than the Arnold's pink.
And that's saying something.
Halesia.
So I've been to many public gardens, and this garden is unique because the other public gardens don't have a cabin that was used by the founder of the Arboretum, and so it's a testament to me to Mary's want to write and record things, that she had a special place to do that. She could have recorded her information in the house, but instead she decided she wanted to be on the property in a remote setting. So it's a unique piece of the property. So I'm just curious as to her writing must have pushed her to wanting to be in a place where she wasn't disturbed. Or
Precisely. She wanted to write, and she knew that she didn't have the peace and quiet in her own house. So she actually had to build a cabin in order to get the peace and quiet that writing required. And so every afternoon, for a period of about 8 years, she came and wrote every afternoon. And that's just a Walpole woodworkers prefab little structure that came into pieces, and they put it together. But it has a little wood-burning stove in it, and she had electricity, so she had everything she wanted. She had a little water boiler pot, so she could have some tea, and she had some little biscuits and so forth. But I think the other reason that this cabin was built here and why this place was special is that I think it evoked some of her earliest memories of plants, which would have been some of the Asian gorgeous rhododendron that she would have seen in Scotland, and which she ordered. So these are some of the earliest purchased plants that came when they moved here in 1927. So all those plants are from that year, 1927 to 1930. And there are still some remaining, which is extraordinary. They're almost 100 years old, and we lost a few in the bad droughts a few years ago. But look at what's remaining. I think that's a testament of the fact that they're planted in a protected area where there's a stream flowing, so they get some shade and protection and also some water. And I think she also was quite inspired by the mountains generally. And then she ordered plants from one of the great Swiss botanists, Henri Caravon. And so she would have felt, okay, the rock garden's up there, the southern garden's down there, and down this is just right in the midst, and I can have my little creek, which has water rippling past, and the pine trees, and I think she felt that was a very special place for inspiration, being connected to some of the great plants people in the world. And Sir Henri Caravon, he inscribed a book to her dedicated to Mrs. Henry, the greatest American botanist, something to that effect. He inscribed a book to her that was very personal and quite something for a Swiss botanist. Oh, well, another reason that she would have been wanting to be inspired by the mountains, I think, was that at the age of about 22, 23, she climbed the Mont Blanc with her brother.
Wow. So she was exploring in more than one continent.
She was. Yes. And as she said at the time, it was the high point of her life because she actually described sitting on top of the Mont Blanc.
Wow.
So.
Well, I understand a lot is going on at Henry, and I know the cabin restoration is one of the projects that you have going underway.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, thanks to Doug Wolf and Matt. Thank you so much for helping to put this kind of back together. You rebuilt the steps. You put a handrail on it. Let's go check it out. So, yeah, moving. So the steps had to be replaced. We put a hand railing on from a Stewardia sapling, and we had to shore up the bottom a little bit, and we're doing a little bit of work on the outside. And then what's going to be really fun is working on the inside. So we're going to have an exhibit in the cabin so that people can see what it would be like to, for Mary Henry or for anyone to be in a place where they can write about their life with her. We have an abundance of scientific data relating to the plants that Mary Henry collected based on her book, based on her herbarium specimens, based on the photographs, correspondence, etc., etc. But here we are. We have these surviving, amazing plants that have survived from Mary Henry, and yet some of them are in great shape, some of them are not, and they need attention. And so we now have the great fortune to have a curator in the form of Henry Ortmeyer here, who will be this bridge to the future, as we have said, so that we can we can map the plants, update the inventories. There have been many lists made of the plants, so but you have to validate them because plants come and go. New ones are added, and some of them die. An evaluation of the actual condition of each plant as we go along, and then it'll inform the priority of propagation, so that Henry will know what the most important things to propagate are, and we'll be right on top of it, so that after this process is done, we'll have a map, we'll have the list, we'll have the data, we'll have photos, we'll have as much information as we want to put into it, and we'll have new plants to restore the Henry Garden with Mary Henry plants. And it's really exciting because it really is a bridge to the future. And Henry, well, maybe you could explain what you're doing over here, if you'd like to share that with
Sure. Hi. My name's Henry, and as Susan said, I'm a curator here. So right now, I'm basically walking around the garden. I have an old inventory list from 2000, and I'm trying to visit everything that's still on this list, try and find some new things, but the basic idea is I'm going through, and whenever I find a plant, I'll give it a little tag with a new accession number. That just lets us keep track of the plant, and if we propagate it, put it back into the garden, we'll know, and it lets us keep a record, kind of a registry of these plants. I've got its scientific name here, and then I have its inventory number. So this plant is Cyrilla racemiflora, apparently the only plant in its genus, Cyrilla.
I think there are 2 species.
Possibly. Yeah, this is the massively underinformed curator argues with the director. He's been here for
That's what makes
almost
it real, right? You think this is the last time it's going to happen?
No.
So Henry, the age of this tree is, Susan, you know?
Well, in the notes that I found the only notes that I found specifically is that it's before 1960. But I do know that she collected and grew from seed a lot of these Cyrillas. So it comes from Florida, mostly in Florida, but it goes up as far as Virginia. So Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia. So she must have had about 10 on this property, and so you may still find a few.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And some of them, I think her first collections were in the like 36, 37, 38, 39, and then as late as some of the 50s.
Okay.
So.
Gosh, I think of all of the plants at this garden as being tied to the date 1963, because that's the last inventory that you gave me that Mary Henry made. But obviously these things stretch back a lot further. It's going to be really interesting to tie history into these things. So these accession numbers, at the start of each of these accession numbers, there's the date that the plant was introduced to the Henry. Right now I'm just putting 1000 for all of these because for some of them we don't have a planting date, or we're going to have to go back through the historical records to get those planting dates and attach them to it. But right now, taking these accessions basically just gives us a 2020 baseline to be able to go and visit things. And any plant that's tagged like this is going to have a map location, so we'll be able to visit it later. And tied to that map location, there's a plant condition, so I'll mark whether they have any weeds, whether they're in poor health, and we can kind of identify which plants we need to help out fastest or soonest. So I come out to visit each of these plants, and I collect location data, plant condition data, and I give each plant an accession number, and then I send back that information to my computer with an app called Collector by ArcGIS. And once it gets back to the computer, I can give plants annotations and start to build a visitor map, and just make that kind of location data available for anyone who wants to see it, whether that be for research or interested people. Another important responsibility I'll have is essentially rejuvenating the spaces that Mary Henry used to grow plants. So she has an old greenhouse on the grounds that I'll be getting going again with the help of Matt and Doug, who are really important at getting the heating working again, and I'll be getting more of her growing spaces like her trial garden